before we really get started with our session today, I think these are some very trying times for everyone, and we are dealing with a lot of issues. We're in the middle of a pandemic, which is causing a lot of havoc and loss and grief for a lot of people in our communities and around the globe. And in the middle of that, we are also dealing with the issues that were brought to light with the George Floyd situation. And so we have a lot of people that are grieving, that are hurting, and that are in pain. So I am going to violate one of the rules of broadcasting. And I'm going to say, let's have some dead silence for a moment. So I will ask that we take about just 15 seconds to have some silence and to send out some prayers to those of us that are suffering and that are in pain. Thank you. Also, a lot of times we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be perfect and to get this right and to look good and to sound good when we are doing things like this. This is the first time that Muslim Life Planning Institute has had this many speakers at one time. And this is our 10th episode. So I've pretty much committed to that. I'm not going to put pressure on myself to be perfect. And I will ask that the speakers also not put pressure on themselves to be perfect, because we're not in perfect times. And if everything doesn't come out sounding perfect, and we may look a little tired at times, that's because we're doing some tiring work right now. So everyone, relax, and let's get into this conversation and have a family conversation. And for those of you that have joined us today, please feel free to participate via the chat. If you have any questions, put your questions in the question and answer box that you'll see down at the bottom of your screen, so that you can also engage with us in this conversation. And we're not going to be talking. We have some people with us today who are clearly experts in what they do, and they have excelled in what they do. But we're not talking to them today just as experts. We're talking to them as members of the community and asking them to share with us from their professional perspective, but also from a human perspective, who they are and how this situation is impacting them. And when I started out thinking about how to approach this, I started thinking about a lot of the stats, about all the people that we've lost through what has been called unquestionable or questionable police shootings. And I went back to 1999 with Amadou Diallo. And the call at that time was 41 shots. When a young Black man was shot 41 times and unarmed, standing in his hallway where he lived 41 times by New York City police officers. To today, with George Floyd, where the call is, I can't breathe. So I want us to just think about that from 1999 to today, where we have been very vocal about these issues. And we can go back to Emmett Till. And I don't know what year that was. Maybe one of the panelists can shout out what year that was, but let's just say that was way back. Way back. So we've been dealing with these issues for a very long time as a community. So today, we're going to be not talking as experts, looking at it from an expert standpoint, but we're going to be asking people to really touch And let's talk about this from a heart space, that we deal with our hearts and our souls in this. So I'm not going to do the introductions of these are our speakers and these are their credentials, but I will ask each of you to share with us, just maybe take a minute and a half, to share with us a little bit about what you do and how what's happening today is impacting you personally and how it impacts your work. And we'll start with, I'm looking at my Zoom screen, so I'm going to start from the top, which is Mr. Blackburn. And you are on mute.
I think I'm good now, right?
You're good now.
Well, hello to everybody in the panel. And thank you again, Linda, Kareem, for the opportunity. Real quickly, my name is Darnell Blackburn. I work full-time for the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. We are the standard-setting body for all police officers in the state of Michigan. Prior to that, I spent 10 years as a police officer. I'm a civilian employee now. As far as community activism, I mean, my goal is to be the change that we need the world to see, and to recruit more diversity, more Black, brown people into law enforcement that will stand up and scream to the top of the mountaintop and change and say, you will not lynch a man in public, and we will not allow you to do that by strangling him publicly. So I'm disheartened, I'm disenfranchised, I'm frustrated, I'm hurt, and I'm putting that frustration into more action. That's who I am.
Brother Latif.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I appreciate Muslim Life Planning Institute for facilitating this platform for us today. And you all, I'm very impressed by the work that you all do and the commitment that you bring. I guess my history briefly is that, as Brother Kareem mentioned, I've been working with first responders since 1999, either with first responders in tandem in the Maryland area in 2 counties, or with firefighters in 1 county primarily. I'm a mental health therapist licensed for the last 25 years. And this situation has really touched me and has, I have oftentimes, and I'm pretty sure that the other guests, the male guests particularly, have been repetitively stopped by police since I come from Philadelphia. But since I was a teenager, I've been stopped by police, harassed by police, just because I'm walking from class, I'm going to class. This is on and on. And I have 3 sons, African-American sons, who I'm constantly afraid of them coming under a unscrupulous law enforcement person, more so than them possibly being victimized directly by white supremacy. So one of the things that this situation has brought to me and made me even more keenly aware of is that, like in working with first responders historically as a therapist, I've been hearing their stories and hearing and seeing their issues from a traumatic background, but it's only made me more convinced how important it is to work with our own people in terms of issues of trauma, transgenerational trauma, and that to look for ways of bringing some sense of respite or relief. So that's my piece.
Thank you. Diane.
Hi, Diane Bell McKoy. I'm President and CEO of Associated Black Charities in Maryland. I think bringing my humanness to this conversation, I have to first start off by saying of who I am as a wife of a person who has had 6 strokes in the past 4 years, who is diabetic, who has high blood pressure, who is all the things that makes him subject to being very much to the whole COVID situation. But also I come as my background as a mother of a adult Black male child and 3 grandsons, and a 4th grandson that was killed, murdered in the streets of Baltimore. And so that is my humanness that I bring to this conversation, but it's also a part of who I've been my entire career, which has always been about how do I make a difference in terms of the lives of Black people. That's who I am. From being early in the career, being very focused in kind of grassroots effort in the DC area, and then coming into the Baltimore area and early in my career, in every single way is focused on how do I contribute to make a difference, particularly economically for African Americans, and understanding that it really is about, whether we're talking about criminal justice system, whether we're talking about economic, whether we're talking about health, very clearly that it really is all that beast underneath called structural racism. And that's our work as an organization.
And what's the name of your organization again, Diane?
Associated Black Charities.
Okay.
ABC.
ABC.
The logo.
All right. And Muhammad, tell us a little bit about what you do and how this is impacting you and your work.
Let me take myself off mute. First of all, assalamu alaikum rahmatullah to everyone. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. I'm a retired criminal trial lawyer. Did 29 years in the trenches on the grit and grind. I'm in crime law, the kind of stuff that you read about in pieces like this. Right now, I'm retired and I teach young lawyers how to try cases. I'm at law office of one of them right now, crime law. I also I'm at the law office of one of them right now. It's called I Am Publishing. We have 4 titles out now, and we have like so connected to these called America and Black Essays and Criticisms of Black, which we expect to within a week. Hopefully, it'll at least enhance the conversation. Take it. I pray that it does. Anyway, I think when people say criticism, you have a tendency to always try to shoot somebody down. Sometimes you're trying to be constructive and raise their level, make them raise their level as well. The impact of the particular viewing of this incident, let me say it this way. Doing criminal work, you become very hard. I became very hard. But I also, by the grace of Allah, became very optimistic. Whenever there was a hardship, there was an ease. There was a dark, there was a light. And so I trained myself to try to find where the light is. And frankly, this is a time where a very, very serious sadness, a very serious event has opened the opportunity for the Muslim community to assert its leadership, assert its humanity, and assert a particular level of leadership and humanity into a system that really needs an overdose of humanity right now. So it has impacted broadly, but again, I'm hopelessly optimistic. Thank you for having me, by the way.
Okay. All right. I started out saying that we weren't going to be perfect, so your audio was a little broken up. I don't know whether or not maybe one of our people can reach out and maybe see if we can assist a little bit on the audio. But
I became very hard, but I also, by grace of Allah, became very.
Muhammad, I'm going to ask you to see if you can maybe work out what's happening with your audio. And while you're doing that, let's talk to John. And John, if you can also share with us what you do and a little bit about how this is impacting your work and you personally.
Yes, well, first, peace and blessings to everyone. It is such an honor to be part of this panel of distinguished guests. Currently, I'm a retired law enforcement working in a major healthcare system in the state of New Jersey. And what I do is emergency management for the system out of the corporate office. I'm also involved with our social impact and community impact department, which was set up by a young lady, an attorney who was a defense attorney who came into the corporate world, and she's also a head of the executive vice president of the governmental affairs. So for me, with my background as a pastor, former law enforcement, and now in the healthcare industry, it seems to be a perfect mix, and we're doing some great things in the community here in New Jersey, especially wherever we have a hospital, we have a footprint, we have some type of program or assistance for the community, and we work well with the police departments as well. Prior to that, I was the deputy police director for the city of Newark, which is the largest city in the state of New Jersey, largest police department in the state of New Jersey. I came there in 2014 when Ras Baraka became mayor. He tapped me to be the deputy director. And before that, I was a retired captain, 23 years at the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, where I had made, I was the first Black lieutenant and first Black captain of their homicide division. I spent my early career there, and as I said, 23 years I worked there, doing major investigations, police shootings, death by cops, as well as just the regular homicides from the community. And prior to that, I came in as a patrol officer for 2 years with the University Police Department in the city of Newark. I became a pastor about 10 years ago, and it was an eye-opening experience for me because I've dealt with so many people from all walks of life which had issues. I never considered myself to be in any type of position to help them. But I just found out, through being a pastor and just being open and loving and talking to folks that, when you open up those doors of communication, we were allowed to go into, you can go almost anywhere as long as people feel that you're genuine. So when I came to Newark, I was in charge of the community and clergy affairs units. And what we tried to do there through the clergy in the community was to build relationship with the community. We did community walks. Wasn't that we sent out captains, but it was myself and the director, the chief of police. We went out into the community. And when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and they had a lot of protest, one of the things we did in Newark was we reached out to the community leaders, the clergy, and we told them, we said, listen, we're here to support your protest. We're going to supply police officers with you to march and make sure that you have a safe passageway. Our only concern is keeping our residents safe, keeping our businesses safe. And we were able to do that. We had no problems. As a matter of fact, after the protest, we had an incident where a white superior officer shot and killed a young Black male as a result of a robbery and subsequent car chase. And because our relationship with the community, there were no problems, there were no issues. We had an open door policy to the community through the clergy and through community activists such as Larry Ham, People's Organization for Progress, Reverend Al Sharpton. So we've been making contact with, we made contact with a lot of people in the community, and it helped us do our job. And I just believe that moving forward, law enforcement cannot, especially in this position when I came to healthcare, I see that law enforcement cannot no longer stand by itself in this century, but they have to partner, they have to join hands with other organizations such as the panelists here. And that's the only way true justice is going to come out of cases, and that's the only way they're going to be able to protect and serve. I currently do a Facebook Live every Wednesday where we do, it's called Protect and Serve. And on there, we take the top topics that cops who are on the job cannot talk about. And we talk about community policing. Last night was racism within the police department, and we touch on the current events. So I'm just glad to be here, to contribute what little bit I can to this awesome panel. Thank you, Brother Kareem, who I went to school with. And, we spent our high school years together.
Wow. We've got people who are talking from a spiritual perspective, from a clinical perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, and our last panelist is also in the clinical space, and that's Sister Adeedah.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. My name is Adeedah Rashid, and I actually began working with my primary area of services with women, children, and families. I'm currently, I own a company and provide a service, direct service online for usually couples and families regarding issues of crisis that they're experiencing in their relationships. But that's kind of at the end of my career, because I began my career in '74. And I started at that time in a prosecuting attorney's office, working with women and children who were experiencing sexual abuse, other kind of crisis. And I worked directly with the police officers and the prosecuting attorney's office. And my whole career has basically been with women and children. I've worked in DC, I've worked in Ohio, I've worked in Michigan, I've worked in different parts of the country in the same role, pretty much, working directly with women, children, and families who are experiencing trauma and crisis related to environmental and social issues that they're experiencing, and helping them through that process. Most of deliberately so, my career has been with people of color and people who are usually in economic situations of disparity. That's just where I decided to drop my own bucket many years ago, because I'm a product of the South. And so when it comes to the things that we're experiencing right now in our environment, I see them as a continuum. They've been going on for many years. And I think the victims that are usually the silent victims, and we don't see them until much later, and often in roles of, I guess, where they can become other kinds of victims, are children. Because they are growing up in communities and environments of disempowerment. And I live that and see that more now because I've been married for a very long time. I have one son who I have to honestly say every day I prayed he'd come home. And now I have 10 grandchildren, and seven of them are boys. And I find myself praying even more. That they are going to have a different experience than my own brother had, that my own uncle had, that my grandfather had, that my father had, at the hands of people who saw themselves as acting in the role of law enforcement, but really often were really just fulfilling a legacy that allowed them to think that there was some role they had as superior. That could victimize often people that were not only in my family, but in my community. So the way that I believe that I decided in my whole life to try and help are people who were more like myself and other women in my circles, was to try and work with women, to work with children, to work with families who are really often trying to work with the men in their lives, the boys in their lives, to try and make it through, which is really a minefield. And it hasn't changed. I don't want to say, I do think it's changed. I do think it's better. I think those on the panel, we have a sense of history, know that it has improved, but I do see it as a continuum. I am, I guess, hopeful because I see it, a light in a different way. There was a time when people like the people on this panel would not have been on this panel. There would not have been panels like this. There weren't panels like this in the 60s, in the early 70s that I was a part of, that I ever saw. So I do feel hopeful for my grandchildren, my grandsons, my granddaughters too, but especially my grandsons, because I see them, especially my teenage grandson, in situations that keep me in prayer. So that's the personal side. And I try to make an impact in the work that I do. Now, I say kind of at the end of my career, because I've worked in lots of different capacities. My last role was in Baltimore, in substance abuse, and dealing with people who were in part of the judicial, who were in the court systems, and had lots of stories that were heart-wrenching. But I'm at another point now where I do more things online because, like I think it was Ms. Bell, Diane mentioned, I'm at a point where I'm probably, I guess, one of those COVID-19 at-risk people because of age and health conditions. So I'm also very conscious of that. My work with parents, when I see people online, like pretty much 4 days a week. I'm working with parents who are working with children who are struggling with how to process what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, what they're hearing, and helping them, and teachers, by the way, to be able to help their students, even before they went online, to be able to help children process what's going on, to make sense of it and get through it. And especially when it comes to violence against people that look like their families, that look like them. So I kind of look at my role in terms of relationship work and individual work as micro as opposed to macro.
Let's build on that a little bit. What we've heard in that statement is that we're talking about victims beyond the ones who may have the direct victims. You know, looking at how is this impacting the children? How is it impacting the mothers, the daughters, the communities? And I'm not going to direct a question to any particular person because we want to have a family conversation here. So I will ask any of you panelists to jump in and just talk a little bit about what are we seeing in terms of the mental, the psychological, the emotional impact that this situation is having in our communities.
Well, I like to say that one of the things is that it hasn't manifested yet, but we're going to see that our children and folks in the community are going to have a form of PTSD, because if you look at it, we actually saw a man murdered on national television. And that, I mean, to see someone, I mean, we already, in our community, we already see violence. We see people gunned down. We see the police abusing folks, but our young children, especially our teenagers, they actually witnessed a murder. I mean, just think about it. I mean, this man pled for his life, and toward the end, when he was getting ready to transition, you know, it was touching that he called for his mother, who was already dead, which us who are you know, whether you're Christian or Muslim, you believe that the spirit separates from the body. And, you know, he called for his mother, which tells us that he was in another dimension, you know. So we actually saw him die. Our children saw him die, and our children are exposed to social media, and they work social media a lot better than we do. I mean, they have their own way of doing things and their own platforms and discussions. And we have to think about it, that not only that, but even the subsequent rioting and looting. I heard about it. I was born in 65, so Newark was on fire in 67, 68. My dad was a Newark police officer. He went out into the community during the riots. And as I got older, I heard about it. I read about it. I saw it on Time magazine, the effects of the 67 riots in Newark, and it was devastating to me. And now I'm seeing it on TV because everything is broadcasted. You're seeing cops still abusing people in the community. And, you know, I sort of like went off. I learned to deal with what I was going through later in life through peer mediation groups and, you know, operational stress management, those type of training. But what really woke me up and bothered me was to look in that officer's eyes as he kept his knee in George Floyd's neck. Anyone who has a conscience, especially those of us who worked in law enforcement, we were bothered by that. So, I mean, we don't know we haven't seen how it's going to affect our community, but I guarantee it's already in place that PTSD is going to be one of the issues affecting our children.
I see we have a lot of young people on our panel this afternoon. Brother John was in 65. I'm in 52. So, young brother, I appreciate it. But I think you are quite correct. I think the issues of, quite, as we say, transgenerational trauma are very much in line There's a thing called, which I'm sure Sister Amita knows about, ACEs. There is a ACEs study. I'm not sure was that funded by Kaiser Permanente or whatever, but ACEs is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Exposure or Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's been not just postulated, but it's actually been researched that children who have been subjected to even just one adverse child experience, and some of the adverse child experience is something like a tumultuous family unit, a lot of fighting, the separation from a parent due to whatever reason, but also, of course, to untimely death or to imprisonment, substance abuse and addiction, domestic violence, and there's some more things, which it doesn't really come to me right now, are more predisposed to not only taking up criminal behavior, but having a life trajectory of either 20 to 25 years less than their average counterparts who weren't exposed to that. So someone mentioned Emmett Till. There was a study we hear some things about CDC, Center for Disease Control, talking about the issue of mental health being or violence being a mental health program, being a mental health problem. I think something about the World Health Organization. But there was a conference in 1969 in Florida that late Dr. Frances Cress Welsing references in her acclaimed book, The ISIS Papers, talks about there was a APA, American Psychiatric Association meeting, and then there was a black caucus of those clinicians on the side who determined that the number one mental health program was racism. Problem in America was racism, and of that, not only was racism the number one problem in America, but white supremacy was the primary cause of most mental health issues in America in 1969. Here we are in 2020, and we're facing. The good thing is, of course, everybody has cameras and all this technology, but while a lot of things have changed, a lot of things have remained the same. These microaggressions and victimizations that we see are only symptomatic. It's not about the police. It's about the system. It needs a systemic change, not just a changing of the guard. And I've had some caustic encounters prior to becoming a clinician years ago with police. I've had some very touching encounters with police as a professional, and but it needs a systemic change, in my opinion.
Can I jump in here? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Again, I believe I'm hopelessly optimistic on these circumstances, and that comes from a criminal justice background. But let me give you a personal anecdote. When I was maybe 1962, 63, Kennedy assassination. My mother showed me when people were crying over John F. Kennedy, etc. She made me do a report and outline everything there was to know about John F. Kennedy. I mean, every newspaper, every magazine article, every news broadcast, take notes from, etc. And my dad, on the opposite side of that, showed me pictures of lynchings and of Emmett Till. And the reason why I point that out now is I recognize that there'll be the potential for post-traumatic stress in our community is there. But on the opposite side of that is the revolutionary forces that this particular time frame has unleashed on the world. And there's a generation that's going to grow up believing that the fight back is necessary. And I thought since maybe King's assassination, since the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, we have moved away from that resistance that was necessary to move the culture forward. So I'm hopelessly optimistic that on the side of seeing this homicide, seeing this murder, seeing the murder of Aubrey in Georgia, seeing the murder of, reading about the murder of Miss Taylor in Louisville, or the other brother, in Louisville, that on the opposite side of that, there's a generation that's growing up and seeing that there's a necessity to stand up and fight back, to stand up and take the challenge of leadership, to stand up and take the challenge of moving the culture forward in a positive way. And frankly, the reason why I say that is because that's exactly what motivated me to open my big mouth when I was 10, 11 years old, and I haven't shut my mouth since. And so maybe I'm using a personal anecdote to hopefully project on the community, but I do believe that the community, what you're seeing out there in the streets, what you're hearing from these young people now, as it relates to resistance to racism, white supremacy, as resistance to leadership strategies that have, for lack of a better word, may have dropped the ball in moving the matters forward from the 60s to now. I think there's a generation that's growing up and seeing that the necessity, and it was brought out by this particular incident. So again, there's a tremendous negative, but inshallah, there's a tremendous positive that I see with a door open. I hope that we, as maybe the generation before, have the courage to go back and say, this is the history. We can't match your energy, but we can give you the history and the insight to help you move forward.
So what do we think was different about this particular incident? Because we've had a very different reaction in terms of the cross-section of people that's responded. This has been a response around the globe. We've seen protests. You know, I've seen images of protests in Rio de Janeiro. I've seen images of protests in Canada. I've seen, you know, the European countries coming out and telling the US to use restraint and responding to protesters. So this has been a global reaction. Why was this situation different? Why was George Floyd different than all of the other incidences that have happened where Black and brown people have died through police activity?
I'm going to jump in. I think that it got teed up by so many things before it. I think it got teed up to have this response to somebody that other people may call a president in terms of his behavior. I don't call him my president. The behavior that I think in some ways is also a global reaction, a pushback against that, and a push of that absolute inhumaneness that comes out of that space. I think was teed up by COVID-19 in terms of teed up from the standpoint of having then discovered the disproportionality of people of color being impacted by that, but teed up because of everybody was in a space in this country, isolated and keyed on media, keyed on issues by having the sense of the busyness of going around in terms of everyday work world, and just everything was teed up for it. And so it was like this explosion in terms of, I see it differently. I hear him. I see what happened with Black people. I go back and I look at all that. It was teed up for that kind of response. I don't know if it's teed up for system change, but it's teed up for at least the immediate protests.
And if I could jump in some too, Linda, the other aspect, I completely agree with Ms. Diane. It's a tipping point. It's a boiling point based on everything else that's going on. And when you look at it, like Brother John alluded to, it's one thing for a person to be shot. For a gunshot to occur, it's an impersonal thing. Typically, there's a distance between people. But when you literally watch somebody who scowls with their hands in their pockets, and that's why I call it a public lynching. For me, I see visions of lynching. I see visions of the executioner pulling the lever and the person hanging. The executioner was that so-called officer. And then the other aspect of it is it becomes the people, the bystanders, the other officers were the encouragers that said, go lynch him, kill him, kill him. It becomes a more personal thing, and along coupled with everything else that Ms. Diane talked about. You look at his eyes, you look at the facial expression and everything, you saw that. So I think that's kind of the other part of it that makes it what it was.
Can I let me jump in here again. There's a confluence, a coming together in this. And let's go back to the 60s, 70s, maybe even the 50s. At that point in time in America, America, or at least in the world, America was considered a moral leader, which is why they fought so hard against why the civil rights movement impacted internationally as well, because people were seeing how Black people were being treated in America. And one of the staples of Malcolm was that he would go to Africa and say, look at how they treat your brothers over here. And so America was often trying to find ways to make sure that their lack of moral leadership was not exposed to the world. They would say jazz groups over to Europe and things like that. All right. So they were always considered around the world as the moral leader. Jettison now to 2016, the guy who calls all African countries shithole countries, S-hole countries, excuse me. The nature of the leadership that's coming out of the Trump administration, the fights he picks with everybody in the world, like a 5-year-old child. Nobody in the world sees him as a moral leader. Now, though, his tepid, almost ignorant response to coronavirus, an international problem, his tepid response to a collapsing world economy. So now America is no longer seen as a moral leader. And so people around the world, at least governments as well as the people, are speaking out as a way of saying, take a step back, America, with this particular incident, as well as the full.
And also, like it was said that, we were all in a pandemic situation. So all we had was the news. And, we watched it. I was on quarantine for 7 days, and that's all I saw on every channel. I had to watch nothing else except the news. So now you saw day after day, new developments, someone being killed, a Black person being killed at the hands of officers. And the issue is that policing is an international event. And the same issues that we're having here in America is happening in Jamaica, it's happening in Brazil, it's happening all over. Police corruption, police abuse of power, all these things are going on. But for once, as it was said, now America has been exposed, and people have seen that, and they are not with it, and they are so, we tout ourselves as the greatest nation on earth, but truth be told, our African nations and Caribbean nations, they're far advanced than us. They're further than us. We have become, in some sense, we have become the third world power. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And that's what's happening to America. It's the fall of America that we're starting to see, the remnants of the fall of America, because we have become so arrogant. And there's no greater arrogance than what's in 1600 right now. That white superiority, that white supremacy is folks of color have seen that and have dealt with that in England and Germany. They've eradicated it. But here in America, we want to take over the world and push ourselves in when we have issues in our own backyard, and everybody's saying, no, sit down, shut up. And, and they're starting to stand up and protest, because protest is going on. They're calling George Floyd's name in England and Berlin and all throughout Europe and South America, because it's an outcry about the injustice against people of color, Black and brown people here in America. And the world is tired of it. So, I mean, as Brother Muhammad said, we see it in Newark. We saw it in Newark with our young kids. This was an awakening for them, and they stood up and they stood up and they started moving forward, because they did not let the riots and looting that happened throughout the rest of the nation go on in Newark. They called those folks out, because there's another element here that is going on through these rioting and lootings that are trying to take over our movement. And our young folks are saying, no way. This is about us. And I commend them for that.
If I can add to the conversation here also, I think that I agree with everything that's been said. I think there's also probably two other factors that I'd like to chime into this. One is the interconnection of the world. It's the global connection has been there before this ever happened, through music, in particular with young people, the crossover of cultures. And as time has gone on, the world has changed. I grew up in a Black and white world. Probably most of us on the panel did. My children didn't, and my grandchildren certainly have not. So there have been changes that have happened that have been cumulative, just like drops of water on a stone that have worn away some of the old vestiges that we had in the 60s and the 70s and the 50s and the 40s. The 60s could come about and the 70s came about because of the work of Marcus Garvey and those that came before. It's been, but so we can see that. But also, there's another piece. They often talk about the election of 45. Is that what he's called? Because he was a reaction to holding up a clean glass who was 44, and another kind of glass 45. So people had a comparison, and they could say, wait a minute. But it was shocking at first. It's like any other kind of trauma. When you first get it, you just kind of freeze. A lot of people freeze, or they go underground and listen and do other things. But now you have COVID that said, okay, go home now. Everything shuts down. And it's shut down here in March, but it's shut down around the world in other places. And people in other places read more. They talk more. They communicate more. And so now when the world got quiet and everything got quiet, the environment got quiet. The seas were different. The water was different. Everything was different. So people were taking that in. And so when you get quiet, it's just like when we meditate. You get quiet and you can start receiving what's going on in your environment. And then you can really see that dirty glass. And it's not just one person. Just like Mr. Floyd represents, he's a symbol. But he's a symbol that represents a lot of people. What about those guys who were gunned down by the father-son duo and just shot on the street? I mean, a lot of things we see, but there are things that people have heard over the years. Remember, I don't know if you remember the guy that was drugged on a truck, in Georgia. I'm blocking. It's been so many people. So I think it's cumulative, but then you get to look at what could be the hope that we had, the reality that we have in young people. Part of being young is they still have hope, they still have light, and they have the lessons of those of us, many of us that are on the panel, that can still communicate, they can still share their stories. I mean, I heard stories just like the brother of Muhammad Bashir talked about stories from his family. I mean, I heard stories from my family. I heard lynchings in my family, but that kind of just goes, you don't do anything about it. It just settles there. And then you share with your children, and they share with their friends and cousins. So it's just a narrative that the seeds were planted, and now they're just blooming. And there is a quiet, what is that song? The last voice of revolution will not be televised. What we're seeing is not the revolution. The revolution is happening in the minds of people around the globe. And there's a global awareness that's taking place. And whoever said, they're reacting, said, we're just not going to take this anymore. And so we're going to see a different world. When we talk about the environmental movement, there's all kinds of things that have been going on that we just haven't heard about. But guess what? If you don't have anything else to do, you can go back and read old stuff. You can't watch sports anymore. The diversion, the last thing I will say, the diversions have been done away with. I always tease my husband because I say he's the greatest sports fanatic in the world, but there's no sports. I can't go shopping. So there's a lot of stuff that we used to do that take us off where we need to be, but it's not just us, it's young people, and they have the energy to go out there and do something with their ideas. So I find this to be an exciting time in our period of history, because this history is being made now. But what can we do? We won't have COVID. We won't be shut down forever. We're already going back. When the second wave comes, what will we do at that time? So I think it's important that all of us and others be able to help people be able to utilize the moment in time we have. And those who have an audience, or those who have backgrounds, who know how to talk and teach and work with, and whoever, I can't remember who said on the panel, said this was a systemic structural disorder. What we have to do is be able to teach to that and really help people. And the very last piece I want to say, trauma, yes, we're going to have post-traumatic stress. We've already got it. I can't tell you how many children I've worked with who've already seen people get killed. They've seen their parents get killed. Community violence, people get shot. When I was in Baltimore, I worked in Baltimore, I can't tell you how many kids, or young people in their 20s who were in the jails, who saw their parents shot, killed, somehow just one after the other. And after a while, you get desensitized until something really big or major triggers you. So a lot of things, people are being triggered, and other people are just being aware. So there are a lot of things going on in the environment right now where we could really use people that have resources and are community organizers and know how to tap into. So I'm very glad we have this vehicle to be able to talk about some things that can be done. I'm sure there are others, but I really think that this is a very exciting time. So I'm kind of like with Brother Mohammed Bashir. I didn't see this. My mother sat at lunch counters, and my dad was all kinds of things done to him. They didn't have this kind of organizational things that are going on the globe. We have it now, but I guess it'll be on us as to what we do with it. I'm talking about us, the old heads.
Let me ask a question for those of you who had some connection to the police department, whether you have provided support service to them or been in that space. I thought about, and I've put this in one of the statements that I made, was that we focus on gun control and say we want to make sure guns don't get in the hands of people with mental health issues. What are we doing in terms of ensuring the mental health of the police officers who we armed and give the authority to go out there with weapons? Is there a focus, or does there need to be more of a focus on assessing the mental health of police officers and providing support to police officers?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother.
I was going to say that's what we do at in the healthcare system I work in now. That's one of the things that we're actually doing in the communities where we have our footprint. The South District of Newark is the hotbed of crime in the city of Newark. It's where the most violent crimes are carried out, the most murders, the most shootings, and the most trauma in the community. And what we're doing is we're setting up operational stress management. It became mandatory under the new Attorney General that every police officer goes through a 2-day session of operational stress management, in which we give officers an outlet to talk about their issues, their frustrations, and to assess themselves. I don't think 2 days is enough. I went through a train-the-trainer course, which was about 9 days, through a company out of Israel, which deals with operational stress management for police officers and military. Because what they found was when the officers went through operational stress management, there was less sick time, and there was much less complaints against police officers in the community. So what Barnabas is doing is that they're going into the communities. We've opened up our facilities to police officers to come in, and they deal with clinicians and social workers and also the community. Because when a police officer does something that is traumatic in a community, the community is affected. And when the police officers pull out, the community is left, traumatized. And, like Brother Darnell, as a police officer, we go from call after call after call. It takes its toll on the officers. And you're right, we have the authority. This is the only profession we have the authority to take someone's life. And a lot of times, someone mentioned before, a gun shooting is impersonal. It's not. Most people who make it personal, they're either blunt force trauma, they're using their hands or their feet to kill someone or hurt someone, or they're using a knife. That's when you know the type of homicide was personal. And police officers are not like we just saw with George Floyd. He did not pull his gun out and shoot George Floyd. He used his own body to kill George Floyd. And that's the same thing. It might not be a murder every time a police officer strikes out or lashes out, but he's taking his fists, he's doing a chokehold, as Eric Gardner happened, and that's what leads up to these type of things. So I think that we have to have more of an outlet for the police officers. We have to make it more of their training and more of policy that they go through this, and evaluation. Just like they took an evaluation when they came on the job, that evaluation can't stand for 25 years. I know it didn't for me. So, we need to make it that it comes up maybe every 5 years or they go through some type of complete evaluation to reassess them and see if mentally they're still able to perform the job that they've been entrusted to do.
Can I jump in? I know Brother Latif is on that, but I just want to jump in on Brother John's comment. In the state of Michigan, I promise I'll be brief, brother. In the state of Michigan and in most states, working for the certification board that licenses police officers, in Michigan, a doctor can check a box on a form that says a police officer is free from mental and emotional instability. A medical doctor. Now, most police agencies require they go through the full psychological clinician that the clinician do it. Most departments, but for the state standard, if you got a department that's not on the ball, that's what happens. So going back to what Brother John says, I think you're absolutely so right. What we need to do is we need to set laws that mandate that every 3 to 5 years that somebody go see, because the stigma that's associated with it, and he can testify, and so is Brother Latif and anybody who's dealt with law enforcement. There's such I can be fine my first year, I can be great, and I can just fall off by the 10th year or the 5th year or the 3rd year. And the reality is that I know I have a problem, but I'm not going to go and ask for help. So if we mandate randomly that these people just go get assessed because we want them to be okay, and we want them not to murder our Black brothers and sisters, then we can change the spectrum. Then we don't have to say, okay, nope, don't look at the stigma. Look at actually the fact that we're just going to randomly evaluate you and get you right and make sure that you're on point. Go ahead, Brother Latif. I'm sorry. I'm done.
All right, Brother Latif, jump in there.
Wow, heavy. I've worked with some fine officers in the past, and I mean, really, I'm not saying that just because we're on this forum. I mean, very, very fine officers, almost like social workers. I've seen them on their knees working with victims, in terms of, I've done a lot of death notifications over the years. I worked with the police department for nearly 14 years. And was really touched by many of the stories and many of the encounters I've had with police. I've been on the board of a panel that was screening potential candidates to be evaluators of the police, and we did find a very good candidate to get that position. But Brother Darnell is very right in terms of it needs to be a yearly evaluation of police officers, not just coming through the front door and you're good for the first 1 to 5 years or whatever, but a yearly, and it differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But also we need to know that we need to be aware of the fact that many of these officers, and I think that was in the prospectus that was sent to us by you all, Linda, are coming out of the military. So in terms of militarizing, the idea of militarizing these police agencies, they're coming from a paramilitary or military background. And it's been statistically shown that many of the traumatic issues, there's, as Sister Amita knows, persons don't get, there's a dose exposure, that's what it's called, in terms of, to the degree that you might see a critical situation or trauma is an interesting word, but a critical situation, and that you're there for a couple minutes, that may not be effective for you or impactful on you. But if it's a repetitive exposure, somewhat like the repetitive seeing of the things on TV, the chances or the potentiality of developing not just acute stress disorder, but it moves to post-traumatic stress disorder are heightened tremendously. So many of these former soldiers or military personnel don't go through a stepping down from being deployed to being pulled back to go into Germany or to wherever before they come home, which is typical, and we think that happens for everybody. It doesn't. And the fact that many of the times that their traumatic symptomology doesn't set in until 7 months after they return home or discharge or whatever. And then some of them have several tours of duty. So, it's phenomenal in terms of how much they're exposed to, and they bring that exposure back to the United States. And it's very typical around, for instance, around the 4th of July, that you have, I mean, many of them either drive out of town because the sound of explosives only is a trigger for them that heightens their potentiality for being aggressive, to have aggressive behaviors, you know what I mean? So, I mean, it's just phenomenal. All these stats that are connected to the vets, and they've done a very hard job depending on where they are, and that's one aspect. Just another aspect that I think Brother John mentioned, and it's not, and it's a difficult equation, and that is that many of our police forces are trained by the Israeli police force or Israeli military, which has its own background in terms of the trauma and the brutality towards the Palestinian people. But they're taking the technology of policing and corralling and teaching others around the world. I mean, it's not just America that goes to Israel for these lessons in paramilitarism or policing strategy and psychology, but it's legion in terms of the effect of them on others. And then there's lastly, I'd like to say there's a Islamic tradition from the Prophet Muhammad, peace and upon him, who says that if you see an evil thing, that there's 3 degrees of faith. You should either change it with your hand, if you're able to, which is the highest degree, change it with your tongue if you're not able to, or third and lastly, to change it with your heart being the weakest form of faith. So there's something for all of us to do.
I want to jump in there because I want to ask a question, Linda, in terms of the conversation. I think it all is absolutely critical. Everything every one of the speakers has talked about in terms of how to disrupt that issue in terms of trauma, how it plays out by the police in terms of the community and what should be put in place. But I ask another question, and I ask the question of how do we change that to be the system that we have? I don't want to just in terms of disrupt, in terms of get in there and make sure at this moment we ought to do those things. But I want to know, how do we change the police force for what it is now in terms of the militarization of it? I want to know, how do we change the system in terms of from very much upstream in terms of policies, legislation that lays it out a different kind of way of being. I want to change in terms of what the requirements are to be a police officer. I want to have a system change. I want to go for transformation for a different future for policing in this country. I don't want to just fix what's now there. I want a transformation. I want something very different for our future, for my kids, in terms of my grandkids, in terms of that. So I really curious in terms of particularly those in law enforcement, how do we go upstream? How do we begin to change the system of policing in this country? And yes, we really must pay attention to officers. I know a number of officers that are great as well. How do we change the system though? Lots of what plays out because of those policies and practices that are embedded in the system that we allow to be created the way it is. How do we change that?
You need to have community oversight.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very least, I think that's a place to start. Community oversight, that and not that you're going to see everything, but you know, before I kind of jumped in with the police department, I did several what do you call ride-alongs, and it's amazing some of the things the police deal with. I mean, and as I was told, the police traffic law is much more elastic and much more extensive than regular law. I mean, you could be stopped for just throwing bubble gum out your window, or I mean, this is phenomenal. So they have at their disposal, tremendous resources, and that's used maybe not correctly, but to jam you up if they wanted to jam you up, you know what I mean? So, but I think it starts at the level of community involvement, but community oversight, definitely, you know what I'm saying? That's the level.
I represent a couple of organizations that are involved directly with community policing and community initiatives to take control of the policing. A couple of things that we talked about here that are consistent with that. For example, a couple of brothers talked about trauma for police officers, and it led me to have to do the statistics on it. A police officer, according to a study done in 2018, are 2 to 3% more likely to use drugs than the average citizen. 1/4 of the police departments nationwide have an alcohol problem. The suicide rate among police officers is only the second highest, and the highest is the military, and a lot of the police officers are coming out of the military. So you know it's a traumatic experience. All right. So with that said, though, if we're going to change the systems, then we have to attack every aspect of it. So, for example, when we say you go to maybe speak to a clinician or something like that, maybe once a year, maybe it should be, if there's any act of violence that you commit on the street, any act, you should immediately see a psychologist, or you should have a blood test. What it would do is it's like the old Chris Rock joke when he says, if they charge $5,000 for a bullet, a guy would think twice before he shot you. You'd say, I'm gonna bust a cap in you as soon as I get my check, something like that. Well, that would be the same kind of situation that you would be dealing with a cop. It would be like if you knew that if you put your hands on someone or you drew your weapon on someone, you would immediately get tested, and you're one of that 1/4, or you're one of that 2.5 that are using drugs, or you're one of those that has a bad day at home, etc., and you're going to be evaluating somebody who's going to call you out on, or potentially call you out on it and sit you down, then they may be a little bit more reluctant, or knowing that having someone to speak to may ease that frustration that they have when they get out on the street, or even that fear, which is a lot of times behind it. So we try to do that as well. Community control of the police is so important, but we can never underestimate the power of racism, white supremacy, and the mindset, because there really is a blue versus black, a blue versus community mentality out there, that no matter how hard you try to fight against it, no matter how many officers you think that are good officers, that are working hard in the process, and I respect all of them, except when they take the witness stand in the courtroom, because they have a tendency to lie every time they open their mouth. All right, but
I believe that's impossible.
That in and of itself creates a dynamic. So if I'm that good officer, what does that good officer do when he sees that bad officer? So, for example, take a black man who is in Atlanta, Georgia, and there's a group of white kids riding in front of a car past the curfew, and a group of black kids, a black boy and a black girl who don't know there's a curfew, coming from Morehouse and Spelman, and you attack the black car because you have a blue mentality. But again, the nature of being able to talk to someone, being able to address your issue, whatever thing you have going on that would say, hey, wait a minute, that's wrong. I can stop him. I can stop her. I mean, they literally, officers are being fired for stopping other officers from committing overly aggressive things. And so therefore, in order to change the system, you literally have to understand that this is a mental process, because it's a wearing, almost mentally destructive job. I mean, you see the worst of people 7 hours out of your 8-hour day, at least in the minds of most people. You see the downtrodden, you see the junkie, you see you're arresting the husband who beat the wife who beat the husband, and you're always involved in that. Very seldom do you see in our communities where they're pulling the cat out the tree, or they're going to drink lemonade and jump rope with the kids. So we recognize in urban settings, it's a very tough job. So then therefore, if they're not willing to put mental health and drug testing and things like that as immediately connected to the acts that they do, then we as legislatures, we as community activists, we have to begin to push that as part of our community control of police.
Just want to say one thing, and you triggered that, Brother Mohammed. I was part of a police training several years ago, and I was startled to find out that your ending comments about drinking lemonade, jump rope, and all that, doing the slide, line dancing, which is interesting that we've seen the last few days. It was touching to see officers do line dancing. I mean, I almost wanted to get my shoes on myself, man. Get me line. But it was interesting that this training I went to said that disproportionately the officer friendly, those were the officers that were more likely to be killed in the line of duty, as opposed to the hard-nosed racists that we have now. That the officer friendlies, who we prefer to think about and to endear and to do line dances with and all of that, those are the officers who are more predisposed to getting killed. Now, the other two former officers could maybe address that, but I was surprised. I would have thought that the officers friendlies drinking lemonade and cats out of the trees, that would have been spared. But that's the weird twisted side of thinking about it. You say, wow, how's that possible? But anyway, I don't know if that still holds true, but anyway.
I represented an officer friendly. It's because he's the one who's always with his feet on the ground in the community. So if you spend 10 hours a day in the community as opposed to 1 hour a day in the community, you're going to come into more negative contacts. And even if you are the friendly one, I mean, this is the guy who literally will step to the guy in the neighborhood and say, hey, come on, man, we don't do that. This is not what we do in our community. Not interested in arresting, but that angry, out of control kid responds negatively toward him.
True,
as opposed to the guy who's coming into his
the point is this is a disincentive. This is a disincentive for officers to be more approachable. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Not necessarily the case.
We got a lot of questions. I want to make sure we get some of the people who are with us in the conversation. So, Kareem, can you handle the questions for us?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay.
Assalamualaikum.
Hi, my name is Khadija Ali. I'm just communications consultant for LPI, and I'm just going to read off some questions. These are for anybody to answer. So, okay, so should there be a movement to have the videos of the killings of victims banned from constant television broadcast because of the mental health of the community?
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best, Sean, not to mess with that. I really am.
I would say, because this kind of came up in a recent conversation, for those, and I think there's a parental responsibility. I'm concerned about children being repetitively exposed to these images. Actually, I was, can't think of an appropriate word. I was pissed off. That's not an appropriate word, but I was pissed off the other day when I saw someone interviewing George, our martyr, George Floyd's a 6-year-old daughter. I mean, I think that was I don't care if the mother allows that, and that was the argument we had where the mother allowed that to happen. So how are you? No, I think that there should be a ethical something, judicious discernment in terms of the program directors or whatever the case is to not allow that to happen. So I am definitely concerned about that because it relates to human beings. You could be involved in the trauma or secondarily or tertiarily, meaning on the third level, involved or exposed to a trauma. It's not necessary for you to be the victim of trauma, but to be a witness to trauma can be traumatizing as well. So having persons that constantly see these images, particularly children, despite parental agreement, I don't think is healthy. I mean, so for the rest of us, I think it doesn't do. I mean, going back to the police issue or first responder issue, I've gone to many suicidal situations in the past. I mean, situations where persons accomplished suicide, and the first responders on the scene would say, "Latif, you want to come and see?" It's not necessary for me to see. I'm not there to see that. You know what I mean? So if I don't have to see the image of someone hanging or someone decapitated or the like, I don't need those images flooding into me at night and in my interactions with my family, so forth and so on. I think it's unnecessarily, and it really does more harm than good.
I can weigh in on this also. I think it's very important. You hear I hear on the radio more than I do on television. I don't see why I can't be more on television, where there's a parental advisory that says if there are young children in the room, you might want to remove them. And not just about, and definitely about seeing someone die on television, but that doesn't, at least it brings to awareness, because the age of the child is very important. And I think teenagers or older teenagers can absorb more, but also people who have been exposed to sustained community violence, domestic violence, family violence, they're going to take whatever they see in a different way. But more importantly, young children can't process that. They can't make sense of it. And a lot of times they'll do things to try and make sense of it that are not good for them or good for the family. But I think the parents don't know that. I think that most parents don't even think about that. So I think that what can be done is parents need to be made aware. I won't say parents, adults. So if you're an adult in the room with a child, what age is the child? And we have to say that. Let's remove that child from the room because they don't need to see this. And in terms of showing it, I think sometimes even if you get an audio, as opposed, how many times do you need to see the same visual? But I don't think it should be banned because I think that would play into not people. I think what made this happen was awareness. I think people needed to see it. And children didn't need to see it, especially repeatedly. And a lot of times in working with parents, and I don't do it much with teachers, but with parents, it's just letting them know developmentally, where are you, where's your child, and can you help them process this? And if your child is 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, they can't process that, so, and not only that, what else that you're going through a divorce, your husband and you've been in an abusive situation, the child doesn't need to see that, so I think that a lot of times it's educating people and making them aware, and also the media and applying pressure. We can apply pressure on the media. It's to say, there should be a parental warning here. We don't show children pornography on television.
Right.
I've
worked in tandem with coroner's office, coroners in the past as well, coming to suicidal, homicidal incidents. And when you bring the family in, some of the fine coroners would do this. They would take a picture of the death scene of their loved one, and then and prepare the loved ones, family, friends, to see the picture as the precursor to preparing them to see the actual body. You see what I'm saying? That's for an adult. So to think that a child can be able to take this stimuli in of a picture, a horrid picture of their loved one, their parent, their sibling, or whatever the case is, and be able to process that, it's ridiculous. I mean,
anyway. I think you get one thing that we underestimate is, or at least we undervalue, is our own ability to educate and organize. I think that if we have seen since Emmett Till, the rash of killings of Black people that we have seen or read about or have pictures of or postcards of, the sister started out with Amadou Diallo. I mean, if we just walk ourselves through it, the kids are aware of what the history is, and if they aren't, then we are really dropping the ball. My point, though, is we know this is coming. We know people are going to whip out their phones and record what's next. So we as a community have the unique opportunity now to shape how it is that that's displayed. If they're displaying it online, then we need to be in the forefront of those people who are saying, putting that warning on this, put this warning on that. This age group, we got psychologists, this age group, let the community know, so that if the parents don't know, if the people don't know that they're injuring people by seeing this, or if there's some people are being motivated by seeing this, that at least we are in the forefront of it. We have every kind of professional in the world, in the Muslim community here in America. We are really a unique community, powerful, entertaining, educated, but we should be in the forefront of all the things that we're discussing right now. And that is, if there's going to be labels, I don't believe you ban anything, but if there's going to be labeling, etc., it should be us putting that out there to the community that this is necessary and this is the reason why. And I'll bet my shirt that the community will go right along with it. They'll say, okay, I can't let Junior see that he's only 5, 6, 7, 8, but I'm going to explain it to Junior that this is what's going on in our community. And I think we need to get into the forefront of it because we have the resources, uniquely have the resources to be able to do it.
Thank you. Khadija, you want to bring the next question? Because we got a lot of questions lined up. I want to make sure we get some of these questions in.
Okay. So the next one, does anyone think we moved away from activism as a direct result of PTSD and traumatic experiences?
No.
Repeat that. Sorry.
Does anyone think we moved away from activism as a direct result of PTSD and traumatic experiences?
No.
No,
I think
I don't.
It's been pushed.
Go ahead, brother.
Into into activation through what we've seen. On social media, it was a saying. It wasn't that the police saw the video of the Ahmaud Arbery killing. is that we saw the video. And when we saw the video months later, however be it, it was an outcry and a push to get these two individuals prosecuted. And the push was so strong that they took it away. They exposed the prosecutors in that small town in Brunswick, Georgia, and got it pushed to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, who subsequently made the arrest, brought forth the charges, arrested the third individual who videotaped it because they found out that he had a part in it. And they're looking at bringing sanctions against the district attorney, to the district attorneys who didn't bring forth charges at the beginning. So I don't think we've pushed back. I think that what's going on now is that they just woke up a sleeping giant. And, when this is over, it cannot be over. We have to continue. We have to stay woke.
Yeah, I would like to just interject. While I agree with the brother, I think in looking at just my familiarity just a little bit with research into traumatology, they said that, you have fight, flight, but you also have freeze. And there's been a lot of research on freeze, and freeze is a interruption of the fight or flight response. You know what I mean? And so there are a lot of things online when you see about that. So, and I think there has been a lull period at some point in our efforts. I'm not talking about this incident. I'm just talking about historically, there's been a lull period of some sort. And so that lull period, according to researchers, when you factor in the freeze response, the lull of response, which ends briefly and goes back to activism, that the entity will go back to an effort of trying to complete their action of fight or flight. So during that lull period, it's been identified as being the loss of instinct, a loss of instinct, loss of the instinct for survival, you know what I mean, or meaning. So I think that there has been a lull period in some of our efforts historically, but I think that we have been awakened and we have been energized and incentivized in terms of most recently. And this incident with our brother, George Floyd, has been a good example of the fact that we're not going back to that point. We're going forward. So I think it's a point of celebration of sorts in terms of that we move to activism now and stay away from prior non-activism of sorts. So.
Let me address it. Here's how I hear the question. I hear the question asking us if the activism of the 50s, 60s, and early 70s and the trauma that was heaped upon the community in the 50s, 60s, and 70s gave us PTSD. And then from 80s to now, we have taken a backseat because we just had enough death, enough lockups, enough mass incarceration, and that's where we are. That's the way I read it. So if I'm reading it like that, I'm reading the question like that, then my thought process is this, that we didn't have PTSD, all right? We don't have PTSD. We never had PTSD. What we had was an orchestrated attack on Black nationalism, on Black radical thinking in our communities. Elimination of Malcolm comes on the heels of the Battle of the Bullet and the riot in Rochester, the so-called riot in Rochester, the so-called riot in Harlem, which people were beginning to say was a direct consequence of Malcolm, the Battle of the Bullet speech and the position of Black self-defense. And so therefore we move into a Black radical tradition in the 60s that is competing with the civil rights movement. And Dr. King was smart enough to be able to say from his letter from the Birmingham jail that either you deal with us or you have to deal with these radicals. And so they began under COINTELPRO to eliminate radical thought. So there's where your assassinations, there's where your incarceration of the Black Panthers, there's where your destruction of the Native American movement, the Chicano movement, the killing off of leaders, etc. That's the trauma that I believe they're talking about. But part of that was complicity by Black leadership.
Yeah.
Black leadership was complicit in a lot of that. And Black leadership was complicit in Ronald Reagan's crime bill. Black leadership was complicit in Bill Clinton's crime bill. Black leadership was complicit in the Protect Police Act or whatever it is that they're trying to make into a federal crime. The Black Caucus voted almost 90% in favor of trying to make the any assault on a police officer a hate crime and making the police a protected class. Black leadership has been complicit in that, and that Black leadership led the charge, led the community away from street corner activism. So I don't think it was post-traumatic. I think it was a new change in the heart of the leadership that said we can appease and we can play this game of politics, etc., and we don't need to be more active on the streets. When in fact, King was telling them and Malcolm was telling them that in order to progress, we need that leadership that says nonviolent social change. And we also need that leadership that's willing to step out into the streets and put the gloves on and bang with them if they need to bang. Because then they have a balance. They have to say, do we want to deal with you or do we want to deal with them? Just like King offered.
So we are at, because I want to be conscious of time, but we're at 2:30, which is our scheduled end time. I'd like to just be able to do a little bit of our closing comments, but then ask if people want to stay on for about 15 more minutes, maybe, because we have a lot of questions lined up. And if our panelists can hang in there with us for a little while, I'd like to see if we can get a few more questions answered. And if anyone has to drop off, this is recorded. You'll also.
Should go ahead and ask another question.
Okay. So next question. What are our next steps in building coalitions and in influencing policies? How do we keep the momentum going forward?
So I'm going to jump in here on this one. I think that it really is about looking around in our community. And I say that in general in terms of who's already been in the trenches doing the work and who's doing what work. We've got lots of folks, even on this panel, that are part of the work. And so the question is, how do we identify that? And how do we step out of our own way? How do we step out of our own ego in terms of understanding that it's not going to be either or? It really is going to have to involve including that. Because as I hear lots of the conversation nationally, that I'm reminded in the youth, that I'm reminded of that becomes critical of the point that Muhammad made earlier in terms of around Black nationalists and pushing away from that. You know, we were a part of that. We were a part of including in terms of pushing back that there's one size that fits all, and it's not. I would say that to do away with what we see in this country, and I would say it is directed beast, I continue to call structural racism, that we've learned something different from the civil rights days than to now. I think we've learned not to do the okie dokie. I think we've learned in terms of how this. So I think it has to be a very intentional effort and understanding that I'm not going to be out there in terms of protest, because I too, in terms of at an age that I have relationships I can give to the young brothers and sisters, and I'm going to give them that. But it really has to be about a strategy. I don't think we think enough in a strategic way of how do we move this forward, how do we clear out the outcome we want for ourselves, for our community, and how do we do that with strategy? How do we join forces in terms of being clear that this is going to be how you can move it forward? I think that's possible. I believe that that's really possible and doable, but I believe it's going to take a different way for us to collectively come together, because there are lots of brothers and sisters that have been doing the work. They're doing the work pushing against legislation. They're doing the work in terms of making a difference in certain services to family and children. That's part of it too. They're doing the work. That none of this is something that we can let go of. But we really got to find the space to understand that it's not going to be just this or just that. That if we're going to dismantle this beast, it's got to be both pathways. And we've got to figure out how do we join together in terms of kumbaya. That's not real. We'll have disagreements with that. So it means we need to figure out what are going to be those rules of engagement that we can be at the table together, because we'll have disagreements.
Yes, I like to say something. I'm one of the ones that might have to leave out for another a meeting. But one of the things that we saw in the protests, we saw outside antagonizers that were in our community and destroying our communities. And what brought my attention to that was the number of our Black youth who were calling them out and stopping them from actually tagging spraying Black Lives Matter on our buildings and burning down our buildings. So, you know, the youth came out and started calling them out. And one of the things that I started, as I guess it's the cop in me, wanted to know how did they come to our protests more organized than we were. And just this morning, because I still stay in touch with a bunch of my intelligence officers, and we found that in the town that I live in, which is East Orange, there was a group on Facebook called I Grew Up in East Orange. The problem with this is that it was 13,000 members that we found to be kind of strange. When we looked at the administrators, we found that they were white folks from Pennsylvania. And it was a closed group, so we couldn't see what was going on. But some of us have started another group that said, I grew up in East Orange. And what caught my eye was they said, because the first group are not from East Orange. We don't know those people. We never met those people. So what they were able to do was they were able to communicate. And as we looked a little bit further, they had, I grew up in Linden, New Jersey. I grew up in Summit, New Jersey. And I grew up in this area. And in those Facebook groups, they're communicating where they're going to go. They're communicating what to bring, how to bring, how to antagonize, how to break up the street sidewalk and take those bricks that were put down in our community to make our sidewalks accessible for wheelchairs, how to rip that up and use those as projectiles to throw at the police and draw anger and fire because they have an agenda. So we have to, it's nothing wrong with studying your enemy. If you study your enemy, you know how to defeat them, and you also can learn valuable lessons from them. And one of the things that I think moving forward is platforms such as this, where we are all from different parts of the country have come on here, and we just have to communicate more. That's the one thing that I found in our communities that we don't do, is that we don't communicate enough. And I just say this, in Newark, we had a sort of like community Facebook where everyone in the community was broken down by community. Anything happened or went on in there, I got an email, my intelligence unit got an email, and we were able to assess what was going on. We were able to cut down crime, and we also were able to take care of problems and issues, anywhere from collection of garbage not being done to a street light being out. And it was very effective, and it brought us together. And when everyone came together, they were like, Director, thank you for getting that light from PS Public Service back up and working. Thank you for getting our garbage up, because all it was just making a phone call to the different departments within the city. So in order to move forward, we need to take this momentum. We need to build direct communication, because communication is important to any operation. And especially going into November, we have to make sure that we are communicating, we are educating, we are unifying. I say organize, I say strategize, mobilize, and execute. Those are the things that we have to do in order to make sure that we as a people are going to keep this momentum going and be successful moving forward. And we can never, ever let what happened in 2016 happen again, where 50,000 and 60,000 Black folks don't come out and vote and don't engage in the political process. No, because we have to start engaging on local levels as well as national levels. We did it with Barack, we can do it again. So, I just think that that's my little 2 cents as far as what we need to do to mobilize and come together.
And I'd like to, if I could, jump in, only because I don't want to be rude, but I got to take off for another meeting. So I hate I'm missing this. This is awesome. But before I sign off, I concur with the panels and thank you with the panelists. Thank you, everybody. But I do want to, there was a point I saw in the thread, and I want to address this because it's so important. I would ask that everybody who's listening, everybody who's on this panel, I'd ask that you keep the Black police officers in your prayers and your thoughts.
Can you raise your voice?
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Is that better? I said I'd ask that you keep the Black police officers in your thoughts, and your prayers. Can everybody hear me clearly or no?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm saying this because, I saw something in the thread, and John obviously can attest to this. This is a tremendous dynamic to be a Black police officer. I'll give you a great example. I didn't see this. I was told this, that initially the officer, the so-called officer, who I call him so-called because he doesn't represent what a police officer should, but the officer who executed George Floyd, I heard that police officers were assigned to protect his home at some point. I don't know if that actually was the case, but that there was a detail assigned out to his home. With that being said, the challenge that we as good police officers who got on this job to help our communities, to serve our communities, have to deal with when we are being directed or told to do something that is a direct conflict of our moral compass. Obviously, now I'm not saying that those officers somebody should have stood up and said during that incident, no, get your hands off him, get your knee off him. That's enough. That's something in and of itself. That's just it. But to have to go and even be a police officer when you know that the protests are legitimate, when you know that things are wrong is wrong and what's going on is wrong, but you still yet have to do your job, is a very, very difficult position to be in. So I ask that you keep them in your prayers. The second part of this is that I would ask that I think part of the solution to the challenges that with this law enforcement is that we have to get more Black police officers, more people to come on this job that understand the dynamics of our community, that will understand to come in and stand up and say, man, get your knee off of him. That's it. We'll come in and say, no, man, that's not, man, go home. This is what you do. Go home, get out of here. That's, don't do that anymore. We as Black people need to make sure that if we can't integrate police departments, that we infiltrate them and start making them look representative of the communities that they serve. And I think that's just a huge, huge thing. And I think we lose sight of that. We got people like John, who's a director of a major city at a police agency, who's able to implement change from the top down and say, these things are not going to happen on my watch. So I think that's just a monumentous thing that we need to do, is we need to start saying, we're going to integrate or infiltrate these police departments. And we need to hire more Black and brown police officers to make this situation better. So I just ask that we be encouraged to do that before I sign off. And I'll take a quick comment or two, but I gotta get off here. And I appreciate you guys for listening and having me. I'm honored. So thank you very much. Your
word about infiltrating triggered my memory about a report that came out about the FBI had done a research study and found that a lot of white nationalists, white supremacist groups have been infiltrating the various intelligence agency and police departments across the country. Could you speak to that?
And that's my whole point. If we know that there's white nationalist organizations, we know that and it's shown by some of the evidence of the things they do, have infiltrated these departments. Right now, in this age, major cities are saying, we want diversity. They're saying it, even though they may not want it, they're saying it. We want diversity. So let's make them put their money where their mouth is. Let's start pushing more diversity push more applicants into these pools, so that we have a voice as Black people, as people of color in police agencies, to make changes. It can't just be one. And speaking of a suburban police agency, some of the suburban agencies have one Black officer, one Latino officer. There needs to be a push to have more come in, so there's more of a voice, so there's more of an impact. And so that's what I'm speaking of, is that we need to have the mindset to say that change happens from the inside out most effectively. So now we're going to change it. We're pushing more Blacks into law enforcement.
And one additional question I have, and that is that for those potential officers who are coming directly from the military, I would think that somehow that the process from then leaving the military and onboarding to the various police agencies could be protracted, could be lengthened, such that we can do a comprehensive assessment, investigation, background check, mental health evaluations over a period of time before we say, you got the job.
And I would agree with you. And I can speak to Michigan. I can tell you specifically in Michigan that as of the last few years, there are fewer people transitioning from the military coming into police departments in Michigan, and then there have been in at least the last 5 years. There's been a downward trend with military people coming into law enforcement in the state of Michigan. I can speak to because I see that trend. So absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. God bless everybody. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I got to leave. Please connect with me, and take care, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Blessings.
Yeah, I think by judging by all the questions that we have and that we're running overtime, I think this is a conversation that needs a part 2. And it's also saying to us that there are lots of opportunities for us to collaborate and to work together. And I think that, this should be the beginning of all of these various entities coming together to be able to address some of these profound issues that's affecting our community. And I want to turn it over to my partner, Kareem Ali, and let him say a few words as we start to kind of wrap up this session.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, you took the words, right off the screen for me, that I think we're going to need to have a part 2 to this discussion. There were a few areas that we weren't able to really get into because it's a really big topic. We actually talked about as well in our abstract that we wanted to talk about how to transform this social contract that we have here in this country. A contract that took at least 3 or 4 of us to equal one person and, to even sign it. We've got to actually relook at that and so that there's an inclusiveness as well. Talk about dehumanization and the commoditization, of our most vulnerable populations. As well, we want to get into more of how our current situation is impacting individuals, families and communities from a mental health perspective. And so we were really seeking to connect the dots today by having thought leaders in the various spaces and sectors, within our community. And I think that we're going to need to have a part 2. And there were a number of questions that we really are going to be unable to get to in this broadcast. But what I'd like to do is to see if I could get an agreement from all that was a part and participating today, that we build a coalition, that we continue to work together towards this transformation together, and that we don't stop and that we don't let the momentum go away, that we actually work inside this momentum to keep moving forward. I want to just give some thanks to a few people. First of all, I want to thank all the participants to this conversation. A lot of it was short notice. We had thought about putting this together. I think within the last week, we had another show scheduled for this week, and we changed things based on the current climate. And so I definitely want to thank Diane McKoy. Was a last minute call. She was gracious enough to join us. And I'd like to say that I'd like to bring you back to talk a little bit more about Associated Black Charities and what you're doing, because we're going to have to actually get into this area of the economics. We're in an economic decline. And you've done a lot of work in terms of workforce development, and working within the community to, help our vulnerable populations, participate on an economic front. And so we want your voice to be able to speak into that. And as well, everyone else, and I don't mean to give short shrift to anyone that joined us, Brother Latif, he's a regular guest in our program, Muhammad Bashir, John Arnold on Darnell, Blackburn, Dr. Adeedah Rashid. I know she said she's not a doctor. But I also want to thank Samuel Sharif, our executive, one of our executive producers of the program, Erica Christie, who is our engineer, Khadija Ali is our communications consultant, the National Wellness Institute, who is a collaborating partner in our work, as well as the Adeedah Network, who as well works with us to produce this programming. Everyone that's actually online, thank you for sticking with us for so long. We know that we went over. What we're going to seek to do is have those questions answered either on our website, and I would also request that the participants also help us in answering some of the questions if they are questions that actually are inside of the areas that you do work. If we can share those questions with you and get answers from you. And I'm going to let Linda close this out. Oh, this last thing, next week, we are scheduled to come back. I think we're going to move into a conversation around a deeper sense of civic engagement. And we've got professors of social work from Columbia University and Michigan, on the University of Michigan, who will be joining us as well, Johns Hopkins University. And so next week, we're going to delve into a little deeper, what does civic engagement really look like at this time, post George Floyd, and how do we get 45 out? What do we need to do, to become a viable voting bloc, and what do we need to do in order to really understand what's on those referendums? Who are those people in local government that we need to be keeping our eye on and either voting or not voting for? And so, Linda, I'm going to allow you to close out because I keep going. I don't want to keep going, but thank you so much for this wonderful program, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Billy.
I'll let Kareem have that last word, and I will just say salam alaikum and thanks everyone for joining.